Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. You seem to be the repository of a lot of secrets, but there's a third secret you don't know. And that it's not my birthday today, but it's my political birthday, because on the 13th of June 1987, I was elected 32 years ago for the first time to Parliament. So now you're talking about anniversaries. And what happened then was that I was, of course, a very young and idealistic member of Parliament. And I have to confess that this idealism and positive way has not left me, although I grew older. I would like to be seen as the person who still has a passion for idealism and has a passion for what we do. And I think what we're being asked here to do by Abdulaziz Al-Babtain, who has devoted so much of his time with passion for peace, is to also be passionate about what we are doing here, because it's a very important aspect for all mankind. Of course, the experience of the Central Republic of Africa has shown that, of course, you can come to an agreement, that talks can lead to an agreement, that conflict can be overcome, but clearly it needs also to be an agreement which is implemented, but also invigorated by a shared culture of peace and a renewed sense of community, away from close sectarian and tribal allegiances. For we are all called to make our contribution. In the words of Edmund Burke, all that is necessary for the triumph of evil is that good men do nothing. And I think we all must keep that in mind. We must bear in mind the UNESCO's constitutional statement that since wars begin in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men that the defenses of peace must be constructed. And how better can we construct these defenses than by teaching and forming in education, peace in education, throughout the whole spectrum of the educational formation in all countries, particularly in countries where there's an urgent need to address intolerance, tribal and religious division, and hatred, and the lack of understanding and a unified sense of community. So we need to work in the light of some events which have shown that peace can be kept. And perhaps one of the biggest examples we have is our much maligned European Union. We are at The Hague, the city where historically, in his quest for a continuing peace, Winston Churchill, on the 7th of May 1948, delivered his famous speech to the European Congress, propagating the idea of a united Europe, pre-Brexit, of course, as a guarantee for peace, security, and prosperity for the free peoples of this continent. And this union has managed, in fact, to keep a vibrant peace for over 70 years by undertaking a unique political, economic, and legal construction on the blooded soil of the very continent that was the cause and the main theater of 2 world wars in 1 century. At the heart of the European project is the formation of that peace and prosperity is a spirit that takes international collaboration to a new level and to the as yet unique sharing of sovereignty and the creation of supranational institutions to run and govern the Union. This spirit needs to be protected, even in Europe, where individual nationalism is gaining ground, and also it needs to be disseminated from Europe throughout the globe. The seed of education for peace, therefore, needs to be sown and nourished widely and consistently to create a global culture of peace which imbues both citizens and governing elites alike. I was reading recently the fictional novel of Amin Maalouf, The First Century After Beatrice, and it shows the unforeseen and tragic consequences of a dramatic unnatural imbalance in gender, which resulted from the dissemination of a potion that satisfied the old, misguided cultural urge for families to have male offspring. What seemed to be a small change soon resulted in wide-spanning consequences. And we must look at that experience and replicate it, but for good. We must indeed unleash a culture of peace through education, making what may seem to be a small change to achieve a rolling, deep metamorphosis, killing misguided notions of aggression as a mark of gender, debunking militarism and unbridled nationalism and instead fostering international cooperation and interdependence where pacta sunt servanda, as is the rule, and where might is not right. When conflict develops, of course, it gains its own momentum, and it is therefore for us to create a momentum for peace, founded on sustained educational formation, because it is in this process that we are able to sustain peace over a number of generations. In the words of the great champion of peace and nonviolence, the Mahatma Gandhi, and I quote, "If we are to teach real peace in this world, and we are to carry on a real war against war, we shall have to begin with the children," unquote. The same fundamental grassroots approach is also reflected in the UNESCO Constitution, where the premise is that it is a peace based exclusively upon the political and economic arrangements of governments, would not be a peace which could secure the unanimous, lasting, and sincere support of the peoples of the world, and that peace must therefore be founded, if it is not to fail, upon the intellectual and moral solidarity of mankind. Of course, peace is not an empty vessel. There is no peace without justice. There is no peace without reconciliation. There is no peace without tolerance and mutual respect. Security lies in a global culture of peace. Peace requires also a strong social security net which addresses extreme poverty. There is no peace without development. There is no peace without respect for identity. And therefore, as was discussed also in an earlier session, peace and cultural heritage are intrinsically tied together. And to achieve this, we must work on dialogue and understanding as the tools of peace. We must work on interreligious dialogue. We must work on peace education, including peace education for the protection of cultural heritage, because this is the main tool which we have. In this context, therefore, education institutions at all levels of education, primary, secondary, tertiary, and post-tertiary, have a fundamental role in the formulation and dissemination of a culture of peace. Teaching children and youth mutual respect and understanding, tolerance, compassion, leads to new leaders who have the wisdom to appreciate the value of peace for their nations and the international community as a whole. I think, as Prince Turki told us, culture and that will not stop a bullet, but the education for peace can stop that bullet being shot. And I think this is a very important consideration we have to keep in mind. So the Abdulaziz Saud Al Babtain Cultural Foundation's project for a culture of peace for the security of future generations, based on a curriculum of the culture of peace, which permeates education globally, from kindergarten to elementary schools to high schools and universities, is a project which requires not only the support of the United Nations, but also the support of individual governments, of the states, and of us all, because this is creating a new language of peace, which needs to become also the language of youth. Excellencies, I think that it is important that we keep on renewing our commitment to remain at the service of humanity by putting together our collective energies and cultural diversity to foster the culture of peace, to support the promotion of the culture of peace through education, not only in our own individual countries, but indeed on a global scale. Thank you.